1886. The Mutt. The bitch bites Robert's hand. "Ouch!" he shouts, jerking his hand back in pain. "How could I have been so stupid to trust a half-breed dog?" His voice quivers with anger and shock. He cradles his wounded limb, frustration and bewilderment on his face. Robert is pulling an outsized puppy from the birthing cattle dog, his movements frantic and unsure. The night is thick with darkness, the kind that swallows sound and light alike. Only our lantern's flickering glow pierces the gloom. It casts ominous dancing shadows around us. The air is heavy, humid with the lingering heat of the day, and the distant croak of a frog punctuates the silence. My name is Andy, and I know better than to meddle in a female's labor. I still hear my wife Bukola's screams. I had to pull our breech-positioned son from her womb 5 years ago. I saved their lives, but she still carries the scars of that night, accusing me of the monstrous pain she endured. It's a pain I've never fully understood, but it has taught me to tread carefully around the forces of nature. Robert, however, is taking a chance, a foolhardy chance that will surely come back to haunt him. As I watch Robert struggle with the dog, a pang of offense stabs at me. Half-breed? The word is more than an insult. It's a reminder of the world I live in. It judges and categorizes people by their skin color. I am a biracial person with 1/4 black blood. A secret I've carefully guarded. My fair skin affords me a degree of privilege in this world, allowing me to pass as white. But my wife, Bukola, and our son, Marvin, wear their blackness openly, their skin as dark as the pitch of a moonless night. Their future haunts me. I fear how they will navigate a world that sees their skin before their humanity. The stench of the pregnant dog hit us earlier when she arrived at the ice factory where I work nights. The Mutt, driven by some instinctual force, chose the factory's doorstep to drop her 4 puppies. Against my better judgment, Robert had insisted on checking on her, abandoning his training as we heard her yelping in pain. My focus remained on my duties. Tonight, my task is to train Robert to ensure he's ready to replace me. This responsibility weighs on me, especially since Marvin got chickenpox 2 days ago. Starting Monday, I'll be home at night to care for him. My boss promoted me to a daytime position just today. It's a big step up, with pay that exceeds my earnings from both jobs. During the day, I've been a water pump specialist at Parker's Windmills. And at night, I've guarded this ice factory. With the new hours, I'll finally be able to sleep at home with Bukola and Marvin, all while making more than enough money. The thought of this new life fills me with hope and relief, but also with a nagging sense of unease. Change always carries its own risk. I've always had a photographic memory, a gift that has served me well. This morning, I prepared myself by reading the ice factory manuals, committing them to memory. I now understand the factory I've been securing at night for half a year. It makes me feel like I'm not just a guard, but part of its inner workings. As we continue the tour, I explain the factory to Robert. I try to keep my mind from drifting to Marvin's illness. I imagine bringing ice shards home to relieve his itching, but I must guide Robert through the complex processes that run the factory. The cold, precise machinery contrasts with the raw, chaotic world outside. There, race and identity can decide a man's fate. First, we have a wood-burning firebox, I begin. My voice is steady as I break down the complex system into small pieces. It heats water in the boiler for steam power. With its power, we're constantly moving, compressing, and expanding 3 fluids: water, ammonia, and oil. Water condenser baths cool each of these fluids. Robert listens, but I can sense his mind wandering. "Who's in charge of the water pump at the river during the night?" he asked, his tone revealing a hint of reluctance. I suppress a sigh, keeping my voice firm as I reply. You are. That's part of your job as a night guard. You oversee the building and the outside pump. A flicker of disgust crosses Robert's face as he realizes the extent of his responsibilities. The thought of trudging to the river each night to check on the pump clearly doesn't appeal to him. I don't blame him. No one wants to face the dark alone, especially with malevolent spirits lurking in the night. I press on with explanations. The oil circulation keeps the moving parts lubricated and maintains a vacuum. It's rewarding to see the water from the North Concho River being turned into crystal clear, distilled ice chunks at this new factory. But as a night guard, you'll need to check for leaks, monitor pressure, and watch for odd temperature changes. You'll also need to chop wood intermittently to keep the entire operation going for the next day. We've been walking to the river and back, sweat drenching our clothes in the April heat. The humidity clings to us, making the cool air of the Arctic freezing room a welcome relief. I let out a contented sigh as the cold air washes over me, giving me a momentary reprieve from the day's tension. The ice is crystal clear, so it takes time to melt, but it also takes a while to freeze, I explain, demonstrating the rectangular ice molds. When the ice is frozen to the metal, we dunk the molds in tepid water and remove the ice. We then refill the molds with distilled water for the next batch. Each finished ice brick weighs 100 pounds. I grapple with the ice host, showing Robert how the molds are removed from the brine tank. Tonight's ice in the molds isn't quite done. Tomorrow is Easter Sunday, so we're running night ice for the occasion. Robert stays mostly silent as I finish his training. His gaze drifts towards me, scrutinizing. I wonder what's going through his mind, but I don't have to wonder for long. As I ask if he has any questions, Robert takes 2 steps back, his eyes narrowing as he studies me. A red flush creeps up his neck, spreading across his face. You're a mutt, aren't you? He finally spits out, his voice laced with contempt. I knew something was off about you. You've got black blood in you. His words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. My fair skin has not deceived this man. Yes, people have called me a mulatto, I say, keeping my voice even despite the turmoil his words stir within me. Generally, no one realizes my heritage. Those who do don't seem to care. I get my work done. I'm open-minded and relaxed. I flush, realizing I've lost the upper hand. My calm tone betrays my unease. Robert rubs his chin, lost in thought. Before either of us can say more, we're interrupted by a voice from outside. A woman's voice, loud and clear, cuts through the tension. Hello there! Robert barks out a command, as if trying to regain control of the situation. Come on, brown sugar, he says, his tone brusque. Let's see what the Temperance Committee has to say about my discovery. I know the Temperance Committee is nearby. They've been protesting outside the ice factory since February, alternating between saloons and our operation. No ice for saloons and bars? No ice for saloon and bars? The 3-person group chants in unison, their voices echoing in the still night air. For 2 months, I've ignored their pleas. I'm merely a night guard, not a politician. Their disgust with alcohol isn't my problem, but Robert seems eager to escalate our dispute. He marched to the dog-filled doorway, overstepping the Mutt and her puppies with a determined stride. I say, begins the bald man, one of the 2 holding anti-alcohol signs, you must get the pooch and her litter to a new location. Robert dismisses him with a wave of his hand. I've got bigger concerns, he says, his voice rising with indignation. Not the bitch and her litter, not the extravagant use of alcohol, but the infringement of a black person on reputable employment. His words take me aback, and they seem to baffle the committee as well. What say you? The man with the large nose asks, his gaze shifting between Robert and me as if trying to piece together what's happening. The bald man scans the premises, searching for the source of the conflict. The woman of the group turns red and begins rummaging through her purse. My heart skips a beat, wondering if she's reaching for a handgun. My forehead wrinkles with concern. Suddenly, Robert slams both of his fists into my shoulders, hitting me with a force that sends me staggering. "Stupid bastard! Here's a half-breed," he shouts, his voice filled with venom. "I bet our boss won't hire him for the cushy day job once I tell him the truth." I cross my arms, massaging the spots where Robert's fist landed, trying to regain my composure. "What difference does it make?" I retort, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm intelligent. I'm practically a mechanical engineer from studying patents and books. I'm no threat to the employment since few men understand the compressors, pumps, and cooling tanks as I do." "You should be cleaning outhouses and septic tanks," Robert yells, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with rage. The committee members back away, their zeal faded. They realize they had stumbled into a fight they never intended to pursue. "My mother left my father for a black man," Robert exclaims, his voice breaking with emotion. "He upset our family. He rattled my entire world. Your kind should be extinct." I feel a pang of sympathy for the child he once was, torn apart by a world that didn't care for his pain. But there's no time to dwell on it, as the committee members retreat, making their way to the nearest open saloon. Perhaps they believed that our argument would somehow cause less ice for the saloons. With the committee gone, Robert storms back into the factory. He disappears before I can respond. I follow him, my mind racing with confusion and concern, unsure of his intentions. Inside, I see Robert. He's frantically twisting the 15-gauge valves, lefty loosening and righty tightening them with a manic energy. I stand there, incredulous, trying to make sense of his actions. It dawns on me that he's sabotaging the factory, perhaps planning to make me the scapegoat. Instinctively, I charge at him, plowing into him with all my might. My fist connects with his jaw, sending him reeling. Another swipe at his nose, and he collapses to the ground. But there's no time to celebrate my small victory. I rush to the valves, correcting them one by one, my heart pounding in my chest. It's a good thing I memorized the manuals this morning. I know which valves control the explosive pneumonia, the water, and the oil. My hands move quickly, adjusting each valve with precision. But Robert had been fast, too fast. When I glanced back, Robert is no longer where I left him. Panic surges through me. I hadn't thought to bind him, too consumed by the need to prevent a disaster. I scan the room, trying to anticipate his next move. Then I see him, sprinting towards the firebox with 2 pounds of bacon in hand. Any engine mechanic knows that adding a fat-based fuel to a fire without adjusting the valves can cause a disaster. I realize his plan, to blow up the factory in a final act of vengeance. I rush to correct the remaining valves, my mind racing to stay one step ahead. But I'm too late. The bacon sizzles in the firebox, fueling a super hot blaze that increases the steam pressure in the boiler. One of the rivets pop out, and I hear it clatter to the floor. "Daddy!" Marvin's voice pierces the chaos. I whirl around. My wife, Bukola, and our son stand in the doorway, detouring around the dog and her puppies. "Go back home," I holler, my voice filled with urgency. "This isn't a good time. Get help. The factory's about to blow." But Marvin, oblivious to the danger, breaks free from Bukola's grasp and runs towards the firebox, where the pork fat crackles and pops. Another rivet shoots out, narrowly missing him. "Get away from there, Marvin." Bukola's voice trembles with horror, her body frozen in place. I bolt forward, reaching Marvin just in time to drag him away from the impending explosion. "Bukola, take him from here, I beg," my voice strained. "I have a plan to stop Robert's madness." Before I can react, the 2 Temperance Committee men reappear, slipping past Bukola and Marvin. "What's going on here?" Big Nose asks, surveying the scene with wide eyes. They see the overheated fire, the steam boiler about to explode, and me wrestling with Robert. Understanding dawns on their faces. San Angelo might soon be without an ice factory, and they don't seem to care. I drag Robert to the ice room, hoisting him by his suspenders onto the ice hoist hooks. I pray that Bukola and Marvin have made it to safety. With a little luck, only Robert and I will die in the factory explosion. But maybe, just maybe, no one will die. I hurry back to the boiler, which is now releasing steam through the cracks left by the missing rivets. It's a slow release, better than a sudden boom. I throw the bacon out of the firebox, extinguishing the flames before they can do more harm. My hands shake as I adjust the remaining valves, hoping I've done enough. With the crisis possibly averted, I return to the ice room where Robert hangs, groggy and disoriented. "You vandalized the factory because I'm a half-breed?" I shout, my voice echoing off the frozen walls. "Besides your mother's affair, why is my mixed black blood so important to you?" Robert stirs, but before he can respond, I hear footsteps approaching. Bukola and Marvin have returned with the sheriff, who slips into the room unnoticed by Robert. "I am entitled to the day job you were suddenly offered," Robert snarls, his voice hoarse. "If I can't have the fine-paying day job, no one can." The sheriff steps forward, his presence a steadying force in the chaos. "Is the factory going to explode?" he asks, his voice calm but firm. "I don't think so," I reply, my breath coming in short gasps. "I've relieved most of the pressure, but we need to extinguish the fire in the firebox completely. Can you do it?" The sheriff nods and hustles to the firebox, leaving me alone with Robert once more. With the sheriff out of earshot, I ask, "Are you a secret vigilante?" Robert smirks but says nothing more. His silence is unnerving. And I later learned that he spoke no more until his trial. We decided to move from San Angelo to Atlanta, Georgia. Bukola has family there, and we believed it would be better for Marvin's education. We brought the mama dog and her puppies along, ensuring they wouldn't have to wander the streets of San Angelo. Marvin has had a grand time playing with the puppies, teaching them to be good dogs. I worry about taking care of so many dogs, especially knowing that cattle dogs like to herd people. But Bukola was adamant about keeping them all, and I'm determined to make it work. In Atlanta, there's a school called Atlanta University that offers opportunities for people like us. We believe Marvin will learn more in Atlanta than in San Angelo. As we settle into our new life, I find myself reflecting on my own identity. My light skin allows me to navigate a world that might otherwise reject me. But sometimes, I wish I looked more obviously black. It's a paradox. The protection that my complexion affords me also limits my freedom. But deep down, I hold on to the hope that one day, people will treat each other equally, regardless of how we look. I hope that the world will grow kinder, fairer, and more understanding.